The street smelled of rain and exhaust fumes that morning. A black Mercedes slid to a stop like a knife cutting silk. The door opened, and she stepped out. Tall, elegant, untouchable. The kind of woman who made people look twice, and then quickly look away. He was just an old man near the wall, gray-haired, worn clothes, sitting quietly, as if he had nowhere better to be, because, in that moment, as far as anyone could tell, he didn't. Their paths were never supposed to cross. But when her hand rose and fell, the crack of the slap cutting through the morning noise like a gunshot, everything shifted. A crowd froze. A driver turned away. A street vendor lowered his eyes. She adjusted her sunglasses and walked into the boutique without a backward glance. He pressed his hand slowly to his cheek. His eyes, calm and sharp and strangely patient, followed her through the glass. He didn't look angry. He looked fascinated. She thought she'd slapped a beggar that morning. She had no idea she'd just humiliated the man who was about to change her life forever. Fiona Adaran moved through the world as though it had been designed specifically for her comfort. At 5'10", with caramel skin that caught sunlight like polished bronze and long hair that framed her face the way expensive paintings frame empty rooms, she was the kind of beauty that made people nervous, not because she was approachable, because she wasn't. Her father, Chief Matthew Adaran, had built one of the country's largest industrial fortunes from nothing, and then, in a slow and loving act of destruction, he had handed every comfort to his only daughter until she mistook indulgence for love and power for character. Whatever Fiona wanted, she received. Whatever she hinted at, she was given. Not for her to earn, not for her to build, simply for her to claim. And with each unchecked desire, Fiona grew colder, sharper, more certain that the world existed to serve her and that anyone who failed to do so deserved whatever happened to them. She never raised her voice in public. She didn't need to. One slow sweep of her dark eyes across a room was enough to remind every driver, every shop assistant, every junior employee that they were here to serve her, and she would not forget when they didn't. Her cruelty was private, precise. The way she spoke to her housekeeper when no guests were watching. The way she dismissed her driver with a look that made him flinch. The way she returned food at restaurants with enough coldness to make the server stammer. But beneath the elegance and the sharp edges, Fiona had a plan. His name was Stephen. She had learned it 3 months ago. She had studied his schedule, his preferences, his reputation for choosing simple women over glamorous ones. She had built her strategy in careful, patient layers, a curated personality, manufactured coincidences, a humble wardrobe she only wore around him. Her goal was marriage, and after marriage, wealth. Even divorce, she had calculated, would leave her set for life. Men like him fall for sincerity, she had told her friend Maya one evening, rehearsing her act in the mirror. So, I'll give him the most sincere woman he's ever seen. Maya had laughed. Fiona hadn't. She was already rehearsing.
His real name was Stephen Olide. He was 42 years old, unmarried, and one of the wealthiest men in the country, though you would never have guessed it from looking at him. He drove unbranded cars, he wore simple clothes. The only detail that hinted at his wealth was his watch, understated, expensive, the kind that people who knew noticed and people who didn't ignored. Stephen had built his empire quietly, real estate, energy, global investments, and he had done it from a place of deep, private pain. He had been 14 when his mother left his father for a wealthier man. He remembered watching his father's face the night the truth came out. He remembered the way the man he had most admired in the world simply collapsed. His father died of a heart attack 3 weeks later. Stephen had stood at that grave with a boy's grief and a man's fury, and he had made a vow. No one would ever do to him what had been done to his father. He would build a life so carefully guarded that betrayal could never find its way inside. And so he developed a habit. Sometimes, when he needed to understand the world honestly, he disguised himself, a maintenance worker, a delivery driver, an elderly vagrant. He would observe. He would watch how people behaved when they believed no one important was watching. He had learned through years of quiet observation that people only show their truest selves to those they consider invisible. So he made himself invisible. That morning near the jewelry boutique, he had been conducting mental notes for a charity project. It was meant to be a quiet day, until a woman's palm connected with his face. He didn't feel rage, he felt fascination, because the violence behind such a small moment, the entitlement in her voice, the ease of the cruelty told him something important. This was not a woman having a bad day. This was a woman whose heart had been left unchecked for too long. He had watched her walk back into the boutique, had watched her emerge minutes later, already wearing her new bracelet, already moving on. She hadn't looked back once. Stephen had. He didn't know her name yet. He didn't know she already knew his. He only knew one thing. A woman capable of that kind of casual cruelty was worth watching. The airport terminal hummed with its usual noise. Fiona moved through it in a plain dress and a simple ponytail, her luxury buried underneath layers of careful performance. No diamonds, no designer bags, just a young woman on a modest trip, exactly the kind of woman Stephen Olide was rumored to prefer. "Are you sure he's on this flight?" Maya whispered beside her. "He booked his seat 2 days ago," Fiona murmured, adjusting her boarding pass without looking up. "I told you, I follow his assistant online. The moment they posted that inspirational quote with a plane emoji, I knew." Maya shook her head slowly. "You're unbelievable." "I'm unstoppable," Fiona said simply. She spotted him a few rows ahead. A dark sweater, dark trousers, a book open on his lap. His watch was the only giveaway, understated but unmistakably expensive. He didn't try to attract attention. He didn't need to. The opening move was simple. A wrong seat number, a slight harmless confusion, a warm, embarrassed laugh. Stephen pointed her to the correct row with the easy politeness of a man who suspected nothing. Fiona took her seat and, as planned, glanced back at him once, not eagerly, not desperately, just the soft, thoughtful glance of a woman who had noticed something she wasn't supposed to notice. The hook was set. Midway through the flight, a bag slipped, fell near his feet. Stephen picked it up automatically, of course he did, and when his eyes met hers, he saw exactly what she intended him to see: simplicity, warmth, genuine embarrassment. "You're very kind," she said softly. Stephen didn't melt, but he noticed her. And noticing, she knew, was everything. By the time they were standing near the restroom aisle, another planned coincidence, he had exchanged his name, smiled at her warmth, and found himself quietly charmed. When the plane landed, he lingered near the baggage carousel long enough to say goodbye. She walked out of the airport without looking back. Through the glass, she watched his reflection. He turned, just once, but that was all she needed. The restaurant they visited the following week was designed for intimacy: soft lighting, quiet music, tables spaced generously apart. Fiona sat in a pale beige dress, soft curls framing her face, her makeup barely there. She had rehearsed her order, her anecdotes, her posture. When Stephen arrived, she watched the warmth in his expression as he saw her. She smiled, modest, almost shy, and thought, perfect. The dinner moved smoothly. She asked thoughtful questions. She laughed at his remarks with precisely the right amount of delight, enough to be charming, not enough to seem eager.
She even let him see a hint of vulnerability, a brief glance downward when he complimented her, a small exhale before she answered something personal. Every gesture choreographed. Then a waiter's hand slipped, cold water splashed across her dress, and for 1/2 second, Fiona's mask cracked. Her jaw tightened, her eyes sharpened, her lips parted ready to tear the young waiter apart, until Stephen's hand landed gently on her arm. "It's all right. He didn't mean to. It's just water." She inhaled slowly, forced the wave of fury down, smiled. "It's fine. Accidents happen." The waiter fled in relief. Stephen watched Fiona for a moment, quietly, precisely, without expression. He said nothing, but he filed the moment away like a piece of evidence.
2 weeks later, at a charity gala, the performance continued. She wore something modest. She introduced herself to his colleagues with warmth and restraint. She stood beside him like someone who didn't need to be the center of attention. But twice that evening, small cracks appeared. A plate shattered near the dessert table, and Fiona's face hardened for a single heartbeat before she recovered. A janitor's card brushed her ankle near the exit, and her eyes flickered with a contempt so cold it could have frozen the room, had anyone been watching. Stephen was watching. On the drive home, he said nothing, smiled warmly, and walked her to her door. The moment she stepped inside, her posture dropped. Her expression shifted into something that resembled irritation more than joy. Stephen drove away slowly. He had seen enough. 2 days later, he made a phone call to retrieve his old disguise. Section 05. The Pure Heart. Stephen arrived at Fiona's building in the late afternoon. The disguise was complete. Gray wig, aged makeup, worn clothes, the slightly hunched posture of a man the world had long since forgotten. He settled near the entrance with a bottle of water in a battered bag, and he waited. He didn't have to wait long. Her white SUV pulled up with a precise, expensive sound. She stepped out in a dazzling outfit, diamond earrings, a designer bag, heels that clicked against the pavement like punctuation. The moment she saw him, her face curdled. "Get away from my car," she snapped. He stayed still, head bowed. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to something venomous and low. "I told you to leave this building. If I see you here tomorrow, I will have you arrested." Then she spat at him, right there in front of her building in full view of the afternoon street. She spat at him, turned, and walked inside. The door thudded shut behind her like a full stop. Stephen remained where he was. Still, quiet, not offended, just certain. But then the building door opened again. A young woman stepped out, carrying a tray of leftover food wrapped neatly in cloth. She stopped when she saw him. Her eyes filled with immediate, unpracticed concern. "Oh, sir," she said softly, and she knelt beside him without hesitation. A woman who had nothing to gain and didn't seem to know it. "Please eat something. Are you all right? Did she hurt you?" Stephen looked up slowly. Her name was Chioma. She worked as a maid in the building, Fiona's world. She endured daily humiliations without complaint, offered kindness without expectation, and saw a human being where Fiona saw an inconvenience. "People like you deserve better," Chioma said quietly, glancing nervously toward the door. "She will yell at me if she sees me here, so I must go. But please eat." Then she hurried back inside. Stephen watched her go. He had come tonight to confirm what he already suspected about Fiona. Instead, he had found something entirely unexpected.
The next afternoon,
Fiona returned from a spa appointment, glowing with confidence. She stepped off the elevator humming softly, already planning her outfit for that evening's date. Stephen had been sending warmer messages all week. She could feel the moment approaching, the moment he would say the words she needed to hear, and she could begin planning the next stage. The apartment door was slightly ajar. She pushed it open. Maya was inside, stretched across the couch, sipping sparkling water and flipping through magazines. Fiona tossed her bag aside. "You scared me." "Your maid let me in," Maya said. "Relax." They settled on the couch, and the conversation drifted, as it always did, toward the plan. "He will ask me tonight," Fiona said, with quiet certainty. "I just need one more good performance, and he is completely gone." "You're sure he suspects nothing?" Fiona scoffed. "Stephen is sweet, observant, but not enough to unravel me. You slipped at the restaurant and at the gala." "I handled it," Fiona cut in sharply. "Men like Stephen see what they want to see. He's already blinded. He has no idea who I really am." Outside the apartment door, standing in the corridor in his disguise, Stephen exhaled slowly. The door had been left ajar, only a few centimeters, but enough. He had arrived to observe her casual behavior with neighbors. He had not expected to hear this. He stood very still and listened. "I tracked his flight schedule months before we accidentally met," Fiona continued, her voice rich with arrogance. "Maya, I practically scripted everything. He thinks it was coincidence. Isn't that adorable?" Maya made an uncomfortable sound. "Fiona, he likes simple women, women who don't care about money, so I became exactly that for him." A pause, the rustle of fabric, the click of a compact. It's pathetic, really, how easy it was. "What about him?" Maya asked. "What if he actually loves you?" Fiona laughed. It was the ugliest sound Stephen had ever heard from her. Hollow, contemptuous, utterly devoid of warmth. "Love," Fiona said. "Maya, men don't love. They get attached, and I know exactly how to make them attach." A beat. "If we marry, I win everything. If we divorce, I leave with enough to never work again. Either way, I win." Stephen stood in the corridor with his eyes closed for a long moment. He was not a boy anymore. He was not his father. He turned away from the door quietly. He did not knock. He did not announce himself. He walked away from that door with every secret Fiona had tried to keep, and he began to plan. The private event hall glowed with golden light. Stephen had reserved it with 2 days' notice, instructing his team with quiet precision. Elegant decor, soft lighting, no extravagance. What he needed was dignity, not spectacle. The flowers were white. The tables were simple. The room could hold 100 people. It would hold the truth. When his assistant Daniel approached with the confirmed list, Stephen reviewed it calmly. Business colleagues, mutual friends, public figures, journalists at a careful distance, and one name added that morning, Chioma, who had received a simple invitation with no explanation. "Sir," Daniel said carefully, "are you certain about doing this publicly?" Stephen folded the list once. "Truth needs witnesses." Fiona arrived at the hall like a triumphant queen. Her silver dress shimmered with every step. Her hair moved like it had been designed to. Her smile was bright and ready and carefully assembled. The moment she walked through the doors, the room turned. Gasps rippled softly through the crowd. "She looks incredible. She's perfect for him. She's stunning." Fiona soaked it in without showing it. She kept her gaze on Stephen, standing near the stage with his hands behind his back, his expression unreadable. She glided toward him. "You seem serious tonight." "Everything is exactly as it needs to be," he replied. He offered her his arm. She took it, heart already soaring. He led her to the center stage. The lights were warm, the crowd had gathered. Phones were raised. Someone whispered, "He's going to propose. This is beautiful." Fiona rehearsed her reaction, a gasp, a hand to her chest, perhaps a tear, real or otherwise. Then, Stephen stepped away from her. Just one step, but it landed like a door closing. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the room, "thank you for being here tonight." He paused. "I wanted you all to witness something important, not a celebration." Fiona's smile froze. "A revelation." The room inhaled. "Many of you know me as a man who values integrity. I believe a person's character reveals itself not in public, but in private. Not when they know they are being watched, but when they believe they are not." Fiona's heartbeat stumbled. "Stephen!" He turned toward her. "The woman standing beside me has shown me exactly who she is." The crowd erupted in whispers. Fiona's jaw tightened. Her voice came through clenched teeth, barely audible. "What are you doing?" Stephen raised his hand. The main doors opened. An old man walked in, slow, frail, hunched, wearing the same worn clothes, the same gray wig. He made his way to the stage without hurrying, and the entire room went quiet with confusion. Fiona's blood drained from her face. "What is he doing here?" she hissed. Stephen turned to her fully, his voice soft as a blade. "That man is me." Silence. Complete. Crushing. Total. "What?" She whispered it like the word had lost its shape. The old man reached the stage. Stephen reached over and gently removed the wig. The aged makeup, the disguise fell away. Gasps broke across the room. Cameras clicked like rain. Fiona's hands trembled violently. "For weeks," Stephen said to the audience, his voice steady, "I wore this disguise to observe who Fiona truly was, to see how she treats those she believes are beneath her." He paused. "She slapped me. She spat on me. She threatened me. And while doing all of that, she played the perfect woman for the version of me she intended to marry." "Stephen, please," Fiona's voice cracked. "I cannot explain." "You cannot." His tone was quiet, final. "Because I stood outside your door and I heard everything you said." The room went completely still. Fiona's legs buckled. No, you don't understand." "You tracked my flight. You scripted our meeting. You built a false identity to manipulate your way into a marriage you planned to profit from." He looked at her with something that was not quite anger and not quite sadness, but something colder, deeper, more certain. "You saw a man worth billions and decided to hunt him." Fiona collapsed to her knees. The silver dress pooled around her on the stage like spilled moonlight. Stephen turned away from her and looked across the hall to where Chioma stood frozen near the far wall, hands clasped, eyes wide with bewilderment. He walked toward her. The crowd parted. He stopped in front of her, and for the second time in his life, Stephen Oliide knelt before someone, not in performance, not in gesture, but in genuine, unhesitating truth. "Chioma," he said softly, "you showed me kindness when you had nothing to gain. You knelt beside a stranger in the dark and offered food and care without expecting anything in return. You saw a human being, not a burden, not an obstacle." He reached into his pocket. "That kind of heart is the rarest thing in the world." Chioma's eyes filled with tears. "Will you marry me?" Her hands flew to her mouth. Sir, I don't. Call me Stephen, he said gently, and answer with your heart. She trembled. She looked at him with disbelief and awe and a fragile, overwhelming hope. Then she whispered, yes. The hall exploded. Applause thundered from every corner. Some wept, some cheered, some stood in speechless disbelief. On the stage, Fiona lay crumpled in the ruins of everything she had built, her dignity, her plan, her carefully constructed world, scattered across the marble floor like broken glass. Stephen stood, took Chioma's hand, and turned to face the room. The truth had finally been spoken, and it had changed everything. The hall emptied slowly, like tide pulling away from a shore. Guests filed out in hushed clusters, their voices barely above whispers. Some shook their heads, some exchanged heavy, knowing glances. A few paused near the exit to look back at the woman still kneeling at the center of the stage, as though they were trying to make sense of what they had witnessed. Fiona didn't look up. Her knees pressed into the cold marble. Her hands shook without stopping. The silver dress shimmered in the light above her, beautiful and indifferent, the way beautiful things always are to those who are suffering inside them. Maya came to her side at last, crouched beside her, placed a hand gently on her shoulder. Fiona jerked away. Don't. Fiona, please, don't touch me. Her voice was a fractured thing, barely a voice at all. Maya stayed beside her anyway. Let me take you home. Fiona lifted her head slowly. Her face, that face that had opened doors and silenced rooms and made men feel lucky simply to be near it, was ruined. Swollen eyes, mascara drawing dark lines down her cheeks, her expression raw, cracked open, stripped of every performance. He used me, she whispered. Maya closed her eyes briefly. No, he showed you who you are. Fiona stared at her like the words were a slap. I warned you, Maya said quietly. I told you he was different. I told you he might notice. Stop, Fiona said. Don't stand there and tell me you didn't know what we were doing. Don't pretend your hands are clean. Maya didn't answer that, because Fiona wasn't entirely wrong. Maya had helped. She had researched, she had facilitated, she had watched and said nothing, not loudly enough. She had enabled. Please, Maya said at last, come home. Fiona shook her head, and in her eyes, beneath the grief, beneath the shame, something dangerous was flickering. Not remorse, obsession. The limousine carrying Stephen and Chioma moved quietly through the city. Chioma sat across from him in the soft, dim interior, her hands clasped tight in her lap, her eyes wide and still overwhelmed. I don't understand any of this, she whispered. Stephen looked at her calmly, steadily, the way a man looks at something he has decided is worth protecting. You're overwhelmed, he said. That's all right. Why me? Her voice was barely audible. I'm a maid. You're not just anything, he said. You showed compassion to someone you believed had nothing. No audience, no reward. That kind of heart is not common. Chioma pressed her fingers to her lips. Marriage is a big step. I don't want you to choose me from anger or pity or... I'm not angry, Stephen said, and I don't pity you. I see who you are. A pause. I saw who she was. I know what I'm choosing." Shioma looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression. The fear didn't disappear, but it made room for something else. "I need time," she said quietly. "I meant yes, but I need time to understand all of this." Stephen nodded. "Then time is what you'll have." He reached forward and took her hand, carefully, without pressure, with the quiet respect of a man offering trust instead of demanding it. Shioma exhaled slowly. Behind them, in the silent hall she had left, Fiona was rising from the floor, and she was not going home. The estate was quiet in the months that followed. Not empty, but peacefully, deliberately quiet, in the way that places become when the chaos has finally finished and something gentler moves in to take its place. Shioma tended the garden most mornings. It had always been something she loved, her hands and soil, the patience of watching things grow, but she had never had the time or the freedom to simply enjoy it. Now she did. She would kneel between the flower beds in the early light, unhurried, brushing her fingers across roses and lilies, while the fountain murmured in the courtyard and the birds called to each other over the white stone walls. Sometimes Stephen watched her from his study window without saying anything, just watched. And something in him, something that had been wound tightly for decades, quietly let go. Their relationship grew in the spaces between events, not in grand moments, in small ones. The evening she fell asleep on the library couch with a book still open on her chest, and he laid a blanket over her without waking her. The morning he taught her a simple melody on the piano, guiding her fingers across the keys with a patience she didn't expect from a man who ran billion-dollar negotiations before breakfast. The afternoon she asked about his father, and he told her. All of it. The betrayal, the heart attack, the 14-year-old boy at a graveside making a vow he had nearly broken. She listened without interrupting. She didn't offer solutions or platitudes. She just stayed there, present, warm, real. And he realized somewhere in the middle of that conversation that this was what he had been searching for without knowing its name. Not beauty, not performance, not the perfect image of a woman designed to match his preferences, just someone who stayed. By the 4th month, love had become an unspoken fact between them, not declared, not announced, simply true, the way morning is true, in the ocean is true, and certain things don't need to be said to be known. One evening, as the sun lowered itself behind the gardens and fireflies began their slow, drifting light, Stephen led Kioma to the fountain courtyard. Soft violin music drifted from somewhere inside the house, arranged in secret days earlier. She looked around with wide eyes. "What is all this?" He took her hand. "You said yes to me once in a room full of noise and chaos while you were frightened and overwhelmed." He paused. "I want to give you something different, something calm, something that belongs only to the two of us." He knelt, not before a crowd, not under stage lights, beneath the open evening sky, surrounded by nothing but garden and silence and the truth of who they had become to each other. "Kioma," he said, "I loved your kindness before I knew your name. I want to build a life with you, not because of what happened, but because of who you are." Her tears came before she could stop them. "Yes," she said, "1,000 times yes." He stood and wrapped his arms around her, and she pressed her face against his chest, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt something she had almost stopped believing in. She felt chosen. Far from the garden, in a different kind of quiet, Fiona sat in a small room that smelled of disinfectant and institutional air. The legal process had been long. 3 months of hearings, of evidence, of everything she had done laid bare under courtroom lights, the manipulation, the fraud, the night she had walked into Stephen's estate with a gun and a grief so consuming that it had turned into something dangerous. The gavel had fallen. The sentence had been delivered. And now she sat in her cell with her hands in her lap and her silver dress a distant memory, and she thought about the woman she had been, the one who believed the world was a game and other people were pieces. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She simply sat with the silence of everything she had built and understood finally that she had built nothing at all.
12 months after their first meeting, the world witnessed something extraordinary. A wedding that would be remembered not for extravagance, though there was beauty and flowers and a sky that behaved as though it had been invited, but for the story that made it real. Chioma walked down the aisle in ivory silk, soft curls pinned with pearls, white lilies in her hands. She was radiant in the way that people are radiant when they are not performing, when they have simply become themselves, completely, at last. When she reached Stephen, he exhaled. After everything he had survived, after all the caution and the guarding and the years of watching people from a safe distance, he had found the one thing he had stopped expecting to find. Someone who saw him. They spoke vows made of truth, not speeches, not performances, just 2 people standing in the clear morning light, saying exactly what they meant. Then they danced, slowly, privately, surrounded by a crowd that felt almost incidental. Stephen held her close and did not let go, and she laughed the kind of laughter that belongs to people who had forgotten they were being watched. The doves were released, the fireworks bloomed, rose petals fell like soft, unhurried blessings, and the ocean beyond the estate reflected all of it, faithfully, the way the truth always does when it finally has room. Years later, Chioma opened her own interior design company, built on integrity, on honesty, on the belief that beautiful spaces should feel like home. Stephen stood at her side at the launch, not ahead of her, not behind her, beside her, the way he always stood. They had children who grew up knowing what love looked like when it was quiet. Every morning, Stephen woke beside the woman who had reminded him that even after betrayal, even after years of careful distance, a genuine heart could still be found. Every morning, Chioma woke beside the man who had seen her worth when she thought he had none. He never disguised himself to test people out of cruelty. He did it because he had learned, slowly, painfully, that the world shows its truest face only to those it believes don't matter. And in that invisibility, he found the only thing he had ever truly wanted. Someone who saw him. She thought she was hunting a billionaire. She never realized the billionaire was watching her all along.